Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first official event as part of Undergraduate Research Week 2026. My name is Jackie Ardum. I am the director of our Undergraduate Research Center for the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences here at UCLA. And this afternoon, we have two back-to-back panels of undergraduate researchers who are all going to be presenting research relating to our theme for this year, which is Research Powers Progress. So actually, our very first speaker is going to be Dean Adriana Galvan, who is here to welcome you all. So, Dean Galvan, you want to go ahead and say a few words?
Thank you, Jackie. Yes, I'm really happy to be here as we kick off Undergraduate Research Week. At UCLA, we have over 4,000 undergraduates engaged in research, and we're just so proud of that. And this week is a perfect way to showcase the work that they do and to share it out. And the Research Powers Progress is comes on the heels of the Chancellor's initiative to recognize that the incredible research that happens at UCLA, inclusive of the work by undergraduates, goes far beyond the walls and labs and classrooms and is intended and does reach real people to benefit people across the world. So thank you so much for all of our young emerging researchers today, and we are eager to hear about your journey in research.
Thank you so much, Dean Galvan. So the way things are going to work today is we actually have two back-to-back panels. So we'll have a panel from 4 to 4:50, and then another one, and then we'll take a quick break. Then we have a second panel from 5 to 5:50. And we have four undergraduate researchers in each panel who are going to be sharing a little bit about their research. So they'll each give short research presentations at the top, and then we'll go ahead and move on to a set of questions that I have for them. And then we'll make sure to save time at the end for a Q&A with the audience. So if you've got questions for our undergraduate researchers, jot them down, put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first set of panelists. We have Saba Aladina, Clarissa Clarillo, Gianna Carcafi, and Alexandra Tabacu. And so we're actually going to start with Saba's presentation, and I'm going to be sharing the slides for Saba. So just give us 1 second to get that set up. Okay, can you all see my screen and Saba's presentation? Yep. Okay, great. Okay, Saba, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Saba, and I'm really honored to be here today. I'm a second year student at UCLA, double majoring in education and Spanish. And my project is titled Empowering Students Early, the Role of Self-Efficacy in Career and College Readiness. Next slide, please. So this research stems from my internship that I've been doing this year, where I serve as a research practice partner intern, taking on the dual role of a college access intern, as well as a co-teacher in the classroom. So I've been working with three other students at UCLA to rewrite the UCLA Community School College Career Preparedness curriculum. So through this internship, I directly interact and engage with middle school students to help them with their college and career development across the course of the year. So we decided that this internship is incredibly important because many middle school students are unaware of the resources and pathways that are available in high school as well as higher education. Next slide, please. So my research question is, how does incorporating situated expectancy value theory-based teaching practices in middle school, college, and career preparedness curriculum influence first-generation students' self-efficacy for college and career readiness? So a huge mouthful, but a breakdown of this is that SEVT teaching-based practices is kind of focusing on how we can motivate students in middle school to find value in their learning. Next slide, please. So for this study, we took on a mixed methods approach to combine both qualitative and quantitative data to get a more complete picture of our students' learning. So on the qualitative side, we collected weekly student feedback along with teacher reflections to help us understand what students are learning, how they were learning, and how they're experiencing the learning process through our deductive coding approach that we took with our data. And on the quantitative side, we gathered structured exit tickets using the Likert scale, which allowed us to measure student confidence as well as motivation in a numerical manner. So by combining these methods, we were able to track trends over time as well as triangulate our data for better accuracy. Next slide, please. So here's an example of how our data was collected on the quantitative side from our exit ticket. So as we can see, the more tangible lessons on the college and career topics, such as lesson 5, which was our second to last lesson, this lesson aligned more with the students' interest over time as it was more tangible learning. In this lesson, they were focusing on creating vision boards, which is a more physical activity, rather than just doing self-reflection, which was in our lesson 1. So we decided to improve from our lesson 1 in order to incorporate more tangible learning because that's where students found the most value and interest. So as we can see in this graph, the students' interest as well as their motivation and confidence increased over time. And we were not only able to observe this through the exit tickets, but also in our experience as teachers in the classroom. Next slide, please. So looking at our conclusions and implications, our main takeaway is that the starting point really matters for college and career preparedness, and that middle school is a powerful and perfect time to begin. As a first generation student from my family, I really wish I had this type of program as a student when I was in middle school to help me explore higher education at an earlier age. We also found that relevancy and asset-based learning plays a huge role in teaching. When students see how content connects to their lives, it strengthens their intrinsic motivation and helps them stay engaged in the classroom. Finally, we also saw that students expressed that they found the most value in tangible hands-on learning in combination with SEVT teaching practices. We decided that this kind of approach helps them better understand concepts that leads to increased student engagement, stronger student voice and confidence in the classroom, as well as greater motivation and hope for their future. Next slide, please. And I wanted to take the time to acknowledge all the people that have helped me throughout this research project, such as my faculty mentor, Dr. Karen Hunter-Quartz, as well as our RFK community school partners. Next slide, please. I'm grateful to share this work with the voices of the students who made this project possible, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Saba. And remember, if you've got any questions, jot them down, put them in the chat, and we'll save them for the end. Our next student presenter is Clarissa Carrillo. Clarissa, go ahead and share your screen.
Can you see my screen? Okay. Hi, my name is Clarissa Carrillo. I'm a fourth-year biology major, originally from the Imperial Valley, and my research project focuses on how mitochondrial metabolism shifts throughout neuronal differentiation. And today I'll be giving a brief overview of my project, determining the role of metabolism in neuronal differentiation. So we know that mitochondria are central to meeting the intense metabolic needs of neurons, since neurons are highly active cells that constantly fire action potentials, which requires high amounts of ATP for energy. As you may know, mitochondria are the main source of this energy and are often called the powerhouse of the cell. But the reason we're studying this is because mitochondria actually do much more than just synthesize ATP and actually act as signaling organelles. One way they do this is by releasing TCA cycle enzymes. And previous research has shown that these molecules signal for various cellular functions in highly proliferative cells like cancer and immune cells. Specifically, increased ratios between alpha-ketoglutarate to succinate and alpha-ketoglutarate to fumarate have been found to regulate cell differentiation. However, the role of these signaling molecules in non-proliferative cells like neurons is not well understood. So this leads us to the question, how does neuronal metabolism change as neurons mature in vitro? The main goals of our study were to first determine whether developing neurons use more glucose or glutamine to fuel energetic processes, and then to measure whether signaling-related metabolite ratios change during maturation. So to do this, we harvested embryonic neurons from pregnant rats and cultured the cells for days 2 through 23 to capture the full growth process, since it takes 22 days for the neurons to reach full maturity. Then at specific time points throughout the culturing process, we use stable isotope tracing with either 13C glucose or 13C glutamine to trace the neurons for 24 hours. And this lets us see how they use the carbons from these substrate to fuel energetic processes like glycolysis and the TCA cycle. And after tracing them, we extracted the cells and ran samples through gas chromatography mass spectrometry, also known as GCMS, to quantify the metabolite abundance and the mole percent enrichment, or MPE. Abundance is the total amount of a specific metabolite present, while MPE is the percentage of that metabolite that contains the 13C carbon tracers from our glutamine and glucose tracers. And so from our MPE data, we found that neurons show higher 13C enrichment from glucose than glutamine overall. And in simpler terms, MPE tells us how much labeled carbon from either glucose or glutamine ended up in each metabolite. So when we see higher 13C glucose labeling, that means glucose is contributing more carbon to that pathway. As shown here with citrate and malate, the glucose tracer gives a much higher enrichment than the glutamine tracer across the time course. And we see this pattern is consistent across most of our TCA metabolites we measured from days 2 through 23. And overall, this suggests that developing neurons rely more on glucose than glutamine as their main fuel source during maturation. We also found that alpha-ketoglutarate associated ratios change over the course of neuronal maturation. And these ratios are important because these TCA cycle metabolites act as signaling molecules. So changes in their ratios may reflect changes in mitochondrial signaling as neurons mature. And so in our data, we see that alpha-ketoglutarate to succinate peaks around day 9 and then declines by day 23, while in alpha-ketoglutarate to fumarate, the ratio peaks at day 2 and decreases over time. And this is interesting because in proliferative cells like cancer and immune cells, these ratios often increase during differentiation, but our neuronal models show a different pattern, suggesting that mitochondrial signaling may be cell type dependent. And together, these findings show that neuronal metabolism changes during maturation in ways that may be distinct from other cell types. And this is important because understanding how neurons use metabolism to mature can help advance knowledge of brain development and neurological diseases, especially in metabolically linked diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I just like to thank my lab, the Ajit Diva Karuni lab and camp and peers for supporting my research progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. Okay, up next in this speed round of undergraduate research, we have Gianna Carcafi. Gianna, you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Hi everyone, my name is Gianna, and my research is entitled Between Advocacy and Access, Healthcare for Children with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities in Lebanon. I'm a double major in neuroscience and disability studies, and this research was supported by the UCLA Keck Humanistic Inquiry Undergraduate Research Award. So what I was interested in studying was first the systemic barriers to disability healthcare in Lebanon, how provider dynamics influence the quality of disability care, how medical systems can better include and serve individuals with IDDs in their own healthcare, how socioeconomic and political crises in Lebanon have reshaped disability care, and what the nature of caregiver advocacy is within a fragmented system like Lebanon's. So my methodology started with community engagement. I worked in a school for children with disabilities in Lebanon this past summer. I then am working on a scoping review to look at all the literature that is already available on the subject. I'm administering online and paper surveys as well as ethnographic interviews, translating and transcribing all of this data, doing a thematic analysis and contextualizing these findings within what is happening in Lebanon right now, and developing my thesis. So some of the questions that I was asking all the participants in my research is first, what challenges, if any, have you faced when trying to access healthcare services? So that can be things like cost, transportation, or availability. How do social attitudes towards disability affect your child's healthcare, if at all? What role, if any, do non-governmental organizations or community organizations play in your child's healthcare? If you could change one thing about healthcare access for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Lebanon, what would it be? Have you had to advocate for your child within the healthcare system? And if so, what does that look like? And do you feel like your concerns as a caregiver are taken seriously in medical settings? Why or why not? Now, some of the findings that I have so far, and I'll explain why this is still in progress in a little bit. First, a lot of access barriers were faced. So that includes high cost of healthcare, long wait times, specialist shortages, as well as transportation challenges, especially when their child is in a wheelchair. Also, there's a large reliance in Lebanon on private providers as well as non-governmental organizations rather than state healthcare systems. There's also inconsistent service qualities across different hospitals and across different providers. Also, I found that parents are the primary advocates for these children typically. They also coordinate and give informal care to their children. There's a lot of there's a lot of limits within disability training with healthcare providers. Also, there are different provider attitudes and understanding around disability, especially when it comes to rare intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's also a lot of social and clinical stigma surrounding disability care, whether that be out in society or within the hospitals themselves. Also, especially with what's happening right now, there's a large dependence on non-governmental organizations, and oftentimes that can be uneven based on your location. So I find a lot of people that are located deep in the north or in the south are very unable to find healthcare, whether it even be from these NGOs or from state hospitals. Also, economic and political crises disrupt the continuity of care. Now, my research this year has had a little bit of an adjustment because of current events. I had to pause my data collection due to the war in Lebanon because it's very important for me to remain sensitive and respectful with my research. And I want to make sure that the people that I'm working with are prioritizing themselves and their own safety and healthcare before the research. I've also shifted to not only doing interviews, but also administering paper surveys to reach families that have limited internet access or might be displaced. And because of this pause in data collection, my research will be continuing into summer and fall of 2026. Now, some new questions I've added to my research because of what's happening right now is how has the war affected your ability to access healthcare? Have you been displaced? And if so, how has that impacted the continuity of care? Especially because for a lot of children with disabilities, they do require a lot more long-term support rather than just a one visit and done. And what role have non-governmental organizations or community networks played in filling gaps during crises? Now, this question is also very culturally based because I find that even just through my own life experiences within Lebanon, healthcare and a lot of different kinds of care are really based in the community, based on who you know and based on who is in your family, because there's not a lot of governmental support. Now, my next steps are to continue interview and surveys. I also wanted to say, if anyone is interested, Sizabel is the school that I worked with. They're fantastic and support a lot of children with disabilities. These are the donation links to Sizabel and the Lebanese Red Cross for just to support the individuals that are experiencing what's happening in Lebanon right now. Lastly, I want to thank my mentor, Dr. Salihan Asiksos. He's helping me with my research and is my faculty mentor for the Keck undergraduate research program. Thank you for listening, and this is my email if you have any questions or want to support the research.
Thank you so much, Gianna. Okay, last but not least, we're going to hear from Alexandra. Alexandra, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you to all the presenters prior to me for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to keep this as brief as possible and as engaging as possible. So, my research project is titled The Role of Oxytocin in Mediating Early Life Social Cohesion in Acetotilapia burtoni, which is a whole lot of words, but I'm going to start with telling you guys a little bit of a story. For the last year, have worked at a street side clinic, and in going there every single week, every day, and experiencing some of the brightest, funniest individuals that I got to work with all the time. I constantly found myself pondering why society got to a point where fragmentation was even an occurrence, and what led certain groups to be ostracized to such a high degree that I was seeing. And I'm a person personally who tends to go back to trying to understand the nitty-gritty mechanisms of things before I can see them in the broader context, which is what led me to my research. And in a conversation with my PI, Dr. Bo Alward, who is here right now, I asked him, I was like, how do we measure empathy mechanistically in a lab where we're looking with this fish species that I don't know necessarily how it translates to humans? How do we see this? And we ended up coming up with an experimental protocol and an understanding and a specific hormone that plays a really big role in cooperative behaviors, in bonding, and in cohesion as a whole. So I'm going to introduce you to that, and that is Abertoni. Abertoni is a model for social behavior that has recently been like majorly boomed, and this is an established model for the neuroendocrine control of social behavior. So this is how hormones in our brain influences the way that we behave. So exactly what I was attempting to interrogate prior. Abertoni is incredibly dynamic. You can literally see their colors change as they move through these social hierarchies. And this, in return, leads to us being able to see how these dynamic neuropeptide and different hormonal signaling and gene expression can influence the behavior that we observe every day. So adults and juveniles, especially, have highly evolutionary conserved behavior like aggression, affiliation, courtship, and cooperation. And personally, I was really interested in looking at affiliation and cooperation. And this is something that is mainly exhibited when they're really, really young, before their other sex steroids go in. And you can see these behaviors come up very early on. And I chose to look at a very, very interesting and very famous hormone called oxytocin. And oxytocin is what we call the love hormone. It is a hormone that is released when a mother gives birth for the first time, when you touch someone, when you are in community with people, during eye contact. All of these things that make us human is also released in these fish in the form of isotocin, which is a homolog. So the molecule is very similar, just very slightly different chemically. They're very conserved neuropeptides, meaning evolutionarily they go very far back, and you can trace these behaviors very early on. And specifically, they regulate social affiliation and cohesion in these tiny, tiny fish. So, what we ended up doing is we took very young fish and we knocked out isotocin. So, they are unable to produce this neuropeptide. And what we wanted to see was how this influences their ability in their very early life to be able to be cohesive with one another. And the method in which we tried to operationalize or like quantify cohesion was something called a shoaling assay. So, shoaling is this behavior that's basically like schooling with fish, where they all come together and they're facing in similar directions and they group together and swim in kind of a pack. And it's our way of looking at cooperation at a very early scale. So, this slide has a whole lot of information and I'm going to try to break it down as easily as possible. But basically, we attempted to take 6 same genotype juveniles. So, 6 of the same fish that either didn't have oxytocin or had oxytocin, or were somewhere in the middle where they expressed kind of an intermediate of both. We took 6 of these, and they're very small, about the size of your pinky nail. And we took 6 of them, put them in a petri dish, and recorded from the top down, and tried to measure how close to one another they were, whether they were all kind of going in the same direction, if they moved substantially more, all to try to figure out whether knocking this gene out that makes this hormone that's known to be integral in bonding is the thing that can cause this early development to be awry. So I'm going to show you a lot of data, and I'm going to try my best to break it down. But in 11-week-old and 7-week-old juveniles, we found very similar results where knockout juveniles had substantially more locomotor movement. So they moved around a lot more, and they also tended to not stay very close together for extended periods of time. If you look over here at a heat map, you can see this very, very well exemplified, where wild type fish over here tended to stay somewhere around the circle. Some of them went in the middle, but knockouts moved around substantially more. So wherever you see more of that yellow color is where they've moved, and they tend to move around a lot more. And we see this in the phenotypes as well in intermediate ages, and when they have some of the expression and some not. Then we actually had a very interesting finding recently where we found that at 4 weeks old, when theoretically maybe their sex stories haven't come in or when they're just substantially younger, the behavior sort of shifts. So this is our most interesting finding and what we're going to end up doing a lot of research on myself. But early in age, the wild types tend, or like people with normal oxytocin, tend to have similar statistics as later on. But ones that haven't knocked out tend to also be able to have this cooperative behavior early on, which indicates that maybe there's something to look at of why this behavior ends up flipping and what makes them less cohesive later on. So generally, like I've said up until now, all of these suggests that oxytocin is not necessarily something static, but something that can influence the way that our development arises and the way that our social organization and cooperation with one another arises. And overall, my main goal in looking at all of this is to try to understand better these early developmental stages and the way that hormones influence this, and how we can then apply this to better human health and better human outcomes. Because generally, not oxytocin, but social cooperation is something that is integral to making sure that humans are able to maintain positive health. And also, if you're looking at society generally, make sure that people are able to be in community with one another and continue to make the cohesive behaviors that make us all humans. So I would like to thank also Dr. Allward, thank you so much, and all of the members of my lab for being here and for supporting. And also thank you to everyone that is coming and for engaging in such a conversation. It's really important to have, and I really appreciate this even being something that we all talk about and engage in today.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Okay, so that is it for our lightning round of undergraduate research presentations. So thank you all to the panelists. We're now going to move into our question and answer segment. So I've got a few questions pre-prepared, and then we'll make sure to leave at least 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So my first question for all of you, and you can go ahead and just unmute yourself and share your answers. But my first question for all of you is how does your research engage with the theme of research powers progress? How are you thinking about power? How are you thinking about progress? And kind of where does your research intervene? So who wants to start off first?
Hey, I can get started. First of all, I absolutely loved everyone's presentations. It was so interesting to hear about all the different fields that we have going on. So my research, as a reminder, I presented about healthcare for kids with IDDs in Lebanon. And I would say that my research is very related to the topic of power and how that plays into people's lives. So I'm not sure if any of you guys have like background within anthro and global health, but there's a concept called biopower, which is essentially how overarching systems can control people through their health, through their biology, those kinds of things. And so I think that biopower really comes into play when it comes to my research because well, healthcare, people's healthcare is so related to their ability to survive, their ability to thrive. And so when a government or a system is not actively providing equitable healthcare to all people, to people of different socioeconomic classes, to people in different geographical areas, that's such a I guess a prominent example of biopower. And so I think one thing that I study a lot is how those different powers, like the different like systemic barriers as well as the impact of crises on healthcare, really relate to the effect on kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And also, I guess, how my research interacts with the theme of progress. I've learned so much about how Lebanese culture plays into healthcare in all aspects of life. Now, I'm personally Lebanese, so I have my own experience of that, but I also grew up in America, so it looks very different for me. But learning about how people bring their own power into their lives. They take control when a government is not providing support, when there are various factors affecting your ability to go outside, your ability to get healthcare, your ability to communicate with your child. So learning about how people can take power into their own hands and really use this like collective love that individuals have for each other in a community to be able to progress themselves and to even change systems. I'm working with a physician at the Lebanese American University in Jbeil, and she is one of those people that is just so passionate about what she does. She's a pediatric neurologist, and she is helping me with my research. Her name is Dr. Hanne. And so just seeing how like she uses her power as someone that has a degree to be able to provide equitable healthcare. She volunteers at this school that I worked in, and gets to like actually speak to the families and help them, volunteering her own time and just using that love to, I guess, power progress in her own community. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Who wants to jump in next? Alexandra?
Yes, I would love to. Gianna, I think you did a great job describing all of that, and thank you so much for sharing that as well. I think that what you said is a perfect example of how research, even if it is on like if it's on a community scale or even a mechanistic scale, has the power to influence progress later on as well. I personally came into research feeling a little bit like I didn't know what the work that I was doing could do later on. And thankfully, with my major as well, I'm a human biology and society major. I definitely did not introduce that earlier. But in human biology and society, you learn a lot about how these policy changes that influence genuine like populations can sometimes be started by something that you see in the lab. So one story that I always draw back to is one of my faculty or like professors that I worked with. He was a person who found some very mechanistic finding of how a pesticide affects like a microbe. And this was actually used later on in panels and discussions of whether this pesticide should be removed from different farm workers associations and ended up leading to it being removed, which impacted greatly a majority of individuals' lives in farm working communities and just in communities, especially in the Central Valley in California. That itself is an example that is far from my research, but for me personally, the way that I choose to interact with power is that my research looks at power at a very fundamental level. And the motivation behind the work that I do comes from my observation and sort of continuous meditation with the fact that power has fragmented societies a lot. And I have seen that occur. And I think that in studying things and attempting to interrogate, in looking at things or questions that maybe have these bases in something societal, in looking at these questions very mechanistically and drawing attention to them generally, that itself is the progress, right? Like it's the ability to examine, to draw attention to voices that maybe have not been heard. And even if my research, when I'm presenting it or when I'm writing a lot of very mechanistic things about it, doesn't sound like it pertains to all of the things that I was talking about before. At the end of the day, this type of research is the thing that can maybe make the policy change that says that we need to increase this type of accessibility in this population. Or maybe a mechanistic finding, such as what we have here, can be the grounding point to say, oh, social cohesion is required in healthcare in some way. It doesn't need to be the entire story, but it's a point of the picture. And I think generally, continuously attempting to identify and understand and progress our knowledge is what will end up causing change. So that's what I always hold on to in my research, and what I hope that all of this will end up doing. And I don't know, it's just an honor to be here with everyone who has all of these amazing perspectives. So thank you guys.
Thanks. Clarissa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go. So I think my project connects to the theme of research powers progress scientifically and personally. So scientifically, like I mentioned briefly earlier, understanding mitochondrial metabolism is really important for better understanding neurodevelopmental diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And although my project doesn't directly study those diseases, it's important to have that important background and like that cell biology aspect to then translate those findings into something tangible in a medical setting. And so that's how like my project progresses scientifically, but personally, I also think it's really important to have people like myself. I'm from a really small town, Imperial in the Imperial Valley. Very agricultural, not much STEM opportunities growing up. So coming to UCLA, I knew that was something I really wanted to take advantage of. And so I had the opportunity to join the program Peers. And that's what introduced me to research at first. And it was a really great opportunity because they taught me how to navigate the research setting and reach out to PIs. And without that help, I don't know if I would be in the position I am now. So I think it's really important to have students be able to join these labs and be able to progress in these careers to eventually offer those same opportunities to other students.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. Saba, you want to jump in?
Yeah, for sure. Hi everyone. As a reminder, my project was working with middle school students to bolster student engagement and motivation. So my project focuses on this year's theme of research powers progress because we focus on how can we create equitable change that expands opportunities for students that have been historically underrepresented and underserved, especially in the education field. So one of the things that we have to take into consideration is who is holding power right now and how can this power be transferred to the students in order to empower them so that they feel confident and prepared in their future. Therefore, in our curriculum, we try to incorporate asset-based pedagogy, which means uplifting their students' identities and experiences into the classroom. And therefore, although I see my students as um, young individuals that are still learning and exploring the world, I see them as co-creators of the classroom, which often contradicts a lot of educational or traditional educational experiences that we've had as students, especially growing up. Because typically, a lot of systems take on a banking education approach, which is the teacher simply giving information without allowing for students to share their experiences, their knowledge. So in this internship and research experience, we've been seeing our students as co-creators of the classroom so that they feel that their voice is valued and open and welcome in our classroom. And this type of research project, we're hoping that we're able to show the world and our community that research practice partnerships, especially with community schools, help strengthen power, not only for the university, not only for student researchers, but for the students that will be leading the next generation. So we're hoping that right now we're working with RFK UCLA Community School, but we're hoping that in the future we expand to other schools within LAUSD and hopefully in the future even beyond that.
Thank you so much, Sava. Okay, my next question for all four of you is a little bit more about your experience doing research. So I'm wondering what kind of new or exciting things did you discover while doing your research? And that could be about your research topic, it could be about UCLA, it could be about yourself. So you can kind of interpret that as broadly as you like, or as narrowly as you like. So who wants to start us off with that one?
I guess I can jump in. I loved all those responses, by the way, you guys. I'm so inspired by all the research that you guys do, and now you're going to go and change the world. So something that I absolutely loved learning about, that I didn't particularly expect. I feel like coming from kind of a very first world area. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I know that there's a lot of, poverty and inequity in Los Angeles, but we also have so many resources that are available to us. And especially being at UCLA, there's so much that's available to us. I think I come into a lot of my experiences with this preconceived notion of what I've experienced and what I think other people also have. And so being able to talk to families of children with disabilities in Lebanon, as well as providers, I have learned so much about how much there is beyond tangible resources. I feel like so in at UCLA, I do a lot of work within the field of disability. I'm a Special Olympics coach. I do research with families with disability, and I find that something that I've noticed is that in Lebanon, when you're speaking with people, speaking with psychologists and doctors and people that work specifically with individuals that have disabilities, there is such a high level of compassion and dedication that is not inabsent here, but is less at the forefront here. I think we get very involved in like policy, insurance, those kinds of things when you look into kind of the whole atmosphere of care in America. Whereas in Lebanon, you find that they have a lot less tangible resources in that sense of the word, but there is so much love and dedication that the community brings about and that all of these providers bring about. And it really made me very happy to see because I think I came into this research obviously expecting to have certain results, and some of those results did ring true. And I hope that my research powers some progress in the field of like having more equity, but also just hearing firsthand how much love and care people have both given and experienced was something that was very refreshing and awesome to see.
Thank you.
I can step in. Um, I mentioned this briefly at the end, but my most recent very interesting finding in the pure research side, was seeing that developmental shift very early on. I think that as an example, for reference, if you guys, because I know I presented a minute ago, but early on we saw that what we thought was happening later in our juveniles' lives ended up being switched very early on, which means that there's another question to ask. And I think that that is sort of the essence of what I want to talk about right now, because in doing research more and more and more and gaining more independence over the projects and the questions that you ask, you also find that research is never as straight as you expect it to be. It's not linear. So for me, I started off believing that this was going to be a project that would go like one, two, three, four, and then it would be easy and it would, or not easy, but it would be something that was clear for me to do. But I think the true essence of research comes from the fact that you will constantly have more questions. And especially in this case, these were findings that we found within the last 2 weeks, and which led to even more questions and even more potential experiments and ways to find out what it is that is going on here. And I think that that in itself is a very beautiful part of research, is the fact that you will always have another question to ask, another thing to potentially discover. And honestly, you're never going to be satisfied in research because there is always more and more to find out and more to learn. And when you think that you might know something fully, there could be another piece of information that comes in that might shift your conception of something. And that more so ties to the surprising things that I've learned about myself in conducting research, and that might be applicable to the people listening. But I feel like I've found that research for me has given me a lot of hope, and given me a lot of, I get, yeah, hope in the face of uncertainty. I'm a person who, when I see things happening in front of my eyes, I tend to I feel it very hard. And that was the story that I told you guys at the very beginning, where it was something that I thought about continuously, of what leads people to fragment, what leads societies to become less cohesive. It was something I continuously like racked my brain about. But in doing research, in continuously making small steps to attempt to find an answer or attempt to understand, I feel like I found some sense of hope or some sense of understanding that maybe these findings or maybe these understandings can further our knowledge and further our potential impact on people around us. So I think that that's the new and surprising thing that I've learned, both literally methodologically, but also in myself.
Thank you.
I can
Oh, go
go.
ahead.
Oh, sorry. One thing that was surprising to me was just learning about the field of metabolism. I like wanted to join my lab because like, oh, metabolism, like I've heard about that, but I realized like I didn't know anything. And so it was really cool like coming into this field. I learned that mitochondria are more than just powerhouse of the cell, and that's actually like a pretty controversial saying because they do a lot more than that. And things like, oh, mitochondria produce energy. That's also not something we should really say because energy can't be created or destroyed. So my PI just like taught me all these things that I thought were super cool about the field, and I really ended up enjoying it. I wasn't sure how much I would like research coming into it because I didn't like have any experience prior, but I ended up really falling in love with it. Like Alexandra said, like you just like you want to explore more. It's really encouraging, and I was surprised to find how welcoming everybody is in research. I was afraid like people would be a little bit like closed off and like try to like gatekeep, not really want to help you. But that's not the case at all. Everybody I've met, they all want to help you. They all want to help you succeed and see you progress as a scientist. And so that's something I really enjoy about this field. And it's really inspired me to want to continue doing research and pursue a PhD.
Thank you.
Alexander, I like how you mentioned that research is not lineal because that's something that I really ran into during my project progress this year. So, especially working in a classroom, I learned that there's a lot of flexibility that's required, not only with schedule changes or changing your lesson plans, but flexibility in your teaching approach and how you interact with your students. So, something I've picked up during my experience so far with my research project and my internship is that I need to constantly reflect and adjust my teaching pedagogy to address my students' needs. So, flexibility was something new that I learned during my research project. But on a more broader scope, something that I learned about research that I found quite surprising is that research can be applicable in any field and it can be interdisciplinary. When I entered UCLA last year as a first year, I did not think at all that I would be in the research space because I'm an education and Spanish major. And when I thought of research last year, when I heard the term research, I thought working in a lab, looking at microscopes, like mixing chemicals together. But as soon as I started my research project fall quarter with my faculty mentor, I had no clue what I was getting into. I just knew that it was a requirement for my internship. But I'm really grateful that since my fall quarter freshman year, I have been involved in year-long research projects because it's helped me understand that education is a multi-path field. It's not just a one-way field of teaching. You can go into administration, policy, research, teaching, and so many other career opportunities. And Clarissa, like you mentioned, the research community here is very open, which was something that I was very nervous about entering, especially as a freshman. I was like, oh, no one's going to take me seriously as a first year going into research. But especially this year, being part of the undergraduate research fellowship program, I've been able to meet a lot of amazing classmates who supported me with my research, shared resources, and we've built a tight-knit community together. So I'm hoping to continue building that community in my last 2 years at UCLA as well.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear all your answers to that question. You never know what you're going to get when you ask that. So, we've now got a few minutes left where I want to open things up to our audience. So, if we have any audience members who have questions for any of our panelists, you can go ahead and put your question in the chat, or if you can kind of raise your hand within the use the Zoom function to raise your hand, I can go ahead and call on you. I'll just pause for a moment to let people gather their thoughts. Okay, looks like we don't have questions from the audience, so I'll go ahead and unless something appears. Oh, so we have a question from Tama Hassan, who is actually our director of the Undergraduate Research Center for the Sciences. And her question is, how did you all choose your projects? So maybe if there's anyone, you don't all have to answer this one, but if anyone has an interesting story behind how you came to your project, we'd love to hear it. Yeah, Gianna, go ahead.
That's a really great question, especially because I think my research isn't really tied to a specific lab. I do lab research, but this is something that really came out of a very just a passion of mine. So as doing what I do, I'm a direct support professional for pathway students. I'm a Special Olympics coach. I've talked to a lot of our like athletes and participants who like kind of just in passing mentioned certain things that were very concerning to me, if that makes sense. One of them said they were on a 2-year wait list to see the dentist. And I kind of looked in more into the field of disability healthcare. I mean, I had always known that I wanted to go into healthcare and also separately that I love working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so I kind of started looking at the combination of those two things. And I found that there was a lot of research in America on disparities in the subject. And so I go to Lebanon every summer just to visit my family. And I have an aunt who worked at a school that was specifically for students with disabilities. And she put me in contact with them and I asked if they like needed any volunteers. And so I started volunteering with them and they also have a separate sector where they have volunteer healthcare providers and I shadowed there. And there was one kid that came in and I'll try to go fast through this story, but essentially his mom was talking a lot about how he like was supposed to have two surgeries to fix his eyesight. And they did the first, and then the governmental hospital said that they couldn't do the second. So he was stuck with partially closed eyes and he couldn't see anymore. And just seeing how the system in Lebanon tends to dismiss people that have more complex medical needs was very interesting to me. And then kind of seeing the parallel here, it just became something that I really wanted to research and it's something I want to work in as well. And so I talked to one of my professors who's teaching medical anthropology, but also does research with disabled veterans in Turkey. And I like asked how to get started, and that's just kind of how it all came about.
Great, thank you. Saba, do you want to share a little bit? I feel like we've heard a little bit from Clarissa and Alexandra in their presentations about how they came to their work.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I really love this question because I feel like research is always more meaningful when you identify with it or are able to relate to it. So I actually started this internship my first year, and my first year I worked with high school students. So we were exactly the same age or maybe just a year apart. So I really understood how they felt when they were receiving these lessons and we were teaching the college career preparedness curriculum. And I noticed that a lot of them were disengaged because the curriculum didn't necessarily relate to them for their age group. They didn't find it funny, they didn't find it engaging, they didn't find it entertaining. So this year I moved to middle school because I do prefer working with younger students, but I decided to move to middle school. And this was the first time that this curriculum was being piloted for middle school students. So I decided that we need to see how we can rewrite the high school curriculum, not only to be more age appropriate for these middle school students, but to speak directly to them and relate to their identities. And this was something that I really longed for in middle school, especially regarding college and career preparedness. Because in eighth grade, as I was entering high school, I was kind of lost on pathway I should take. My mom's on the Zoom. She knew that I was really debating between taking the MUN program or the AP history pathway because I didn't really have any sort of guidance to know which pathway would be more beneficial for me, which one I would have a better experience with. So I wish in middle school I had this type of program, and therefore I'm putting in my passion and energy into this internship and research project to serve the students that I have right now in the way that I wish I was guided in middle school. And it's really great to connect with the students one on one and build year-long relationships with them because sometimes I'm able to see myself in some of the students, such as the students that are really passionate and they want to do great in school, but they just don't exactly know what step they need to take next. So I've really had an amazing opportunity and great time getting to know my students throughout the whole year and rewriting this curriculum and revamping it, while also taking into consideration my own identity and experiences.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're just past time. So I would love us all to give a huge round of applause to our first group of panelists. It was really, really fascinating to hear about your research, about your experiences. To those of you in the audience, what we're going to do next is take a quick break and come back at 5 p.m. For our panel with our second group of panelists. So everyone, please feel free to take a quick break and come back at 5 to hear from our other students. So congratulations again to all of you. Hope you have a great job, do a great job, and have a great time presenting your research over the course of the next week. And thank you all for participating. And for everyone else, we'll see you back here in just a few minutes at 5. Bye, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our Bruin Research Powers Progress special panels. This is going to be our second panel of the day, so welcome to those of you who are returning. Welcome to new guests. These undergraduate research panels are a chance for us to show off the really exciting work that our students across campus are doing as part of Undergraduate Research Week at UCLA. This year, we have over 1,900 students who are going to be sharing their work across the week, particularly in our showcase tomorrow. So I encourage you all to check that out. But today we're going to be hearing in the second panel from 4 more undergraduate researchers who are doing research related to power and progress. So the way that this is going to work is each of our students is going to do a very short research presentation of just about 3 to 5 minutes to provide you all with an overview of their work. Then I've got some questions that I'm going to ask everybody, and then we'll go ahead and open things up to the audience. So audience members, if you've got questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat or save them until the end of the presentations. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. So our next 4 panelists are Amaya Ellis, Tamana Tiku, Jade Faircloth, and Sayeda Remen, and we'll be doing presentations going in alphabetical order. So Amaya, do you want to start off, share your screen, and tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing this year?
Yes, I will share my screen now. Can you see that okay? Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Amaya Ellis, and my research project is called The Complex Interplay of Compounded Noise and Heat Effects on Developing Neural Circuits, and I conduct this research in the Tornini lab. So my project focuses on how environmental stressors such as heat and noise may affect early brain development and behavior. I also want you guys to put yourselves in the shoes of these people crossing the street. Many individuals living in urban communities are exposed every day to traffic noise, sirens, helicopters, pollution, and extreme heat. These environmental stressors become part of everyday life, yet we still do not fully understand how early environmental exposures may affect brain development and health. So this map right here highlights how widespread transportation noise exposure is across Los Angeles and surrounding urban areas, specifically the community of South Los Angeles. Communities already facing social and environmental inequities are often disproportionately exposed to these stressors. So why is this important? Neurodevelopment is highly complex and lifelong. While genetics are important, environmental experiences also help shape brain development as well. More research on environmental stressors like heat and noise is urgently needed because these stressors may increase neurodevelopmental risk and contribute to health disparities. So to study this, we use zebrafish as a model organism because many molecular and developmental pathways are conserved between zebrafish and humans. So in particular, we focus on the 2 to 4 days post-fertilization developmental window, which is considered a critical period of neurodevelopment in zebrafish and the late mid prenatal period in human development. And zebrafish also share important anatomical and functional similarities with the human brain, and they develop rapidly, which allows us to observe changes during critical developmental periods. So this slide shows the overall project overview. We expose zebrafish to these environmental stressors, heat and noise, or a combination of both during early brain development, and then examine their change in behavior, neural circuits, and brain activity. So for the heat-only experiment, zebrafish larvae were exposed to heat stress 32 Celsius during this 2 to 4 DPF window, and their behavior was tracked using behavior analysis software. In these experiments, heat exposure caused an increase in daytime hyperactivity, which was consistently observed across experiments with an N value of 4 out of 5. And we also observed reduced sleep at night in the majority of heat exposed larvae runs. So for our noise only, we examined noise exposure. Similar behavior tracking methods were used to observe how developmental noise exposure affected activity and sleep patterns during the same critical developmental period, this 2 to 4 day window. So in noise-only experiments, noise-treated larvae showed daytime hypoactivity, meaning reduced activity levels, and we also observed increased sleep during both the day and the night. We also studied autism-linked zebrafish mutants, specifically the Ashwanell gene, which is associated with brain development and autism spectrum disorder. Our results suggest that environmental stressors may affect individuals differently depending on genetics, and communities with chronic heat and noise exposure may therefore be more susceptible to neurodevelopmental disorders. So overall, these heat and noise exposures cause clear behavioral phenotype changes compared to our wild-type control condition, and these behavioral changes suggest that underlying changes are occurring internally with the brain and certain neural circuits, but we just aren't quite sure what pathways are being affected quite yet. So our future work will focus on brain morphology and RNA sequencing to better understand the molecular and neural mechanisms driving these changes. We also hope to continue building community engagement and partnerships focused on environmental justice. And thank you so much. I want to thank my lab and also all of my programs I've been here a part of here at UCLA. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Amaya. Okay, up next, we are going to hear from Jade Faircloth. Jade, is your screen frozen?
Sorry, I'm trying to share it right now.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jade Faircloth, and my presentation is a total perspective on Article 98 U.S. immunity deals and colonial hierarchies in international criminal justice. And my project was funded and supported by the Keck Humanistic Inquiry Research Award. A little background on my topic, it's about the International Criminal Court, which was created by the Rome Statute in early 2000s to prosecute serious international crimes. And although the US never signed this treaty under Bill Clinton, they did sign the treaty, but it was never ratified, and the George W. Bush administration later withdrew support. Under the Rome Statute, Article 98(2) was originally intended to protect military personnel covered by existing agreements, but the US then expanded this interpretation to justify bilateral immunity agreements, also known as BIAs, which prevented countries from surrendering US citizens to the ICC. The US then used military and financial aid as leverage through laws like the American Service Members Protection Act, also known as ASPA, and the Nethercutt Amendment. And scholars disagree on how to interpret Article 98.2. Traditional legal scholars argue that BIAs go beyond the treaty's original purpose and weaken ICC accountability. Other scholars argue that BIAs reflect shifting political and economic power relations rather than legal colonialism itself. An approach that stood out to me was Third World Approaches to International Law, also known as TWIL, which argues that international law reflects colonial power structures and unequal global relations. So I decided to choose a TWIL framework because this addresses the structural blind spots in existing scholarship by situating Article 98.2 within broader historical conditions, political realities, and economic constraint. And also, there is currently no TWIL scholarship that directly analyzes Article 98.2. So my research question is, does the United States' use of Article 98.2 through bilateral immunity agreements reveal the limits of universality and the reproduction of colonial hierarchies in international criminal justice from a TWIL perspective? My methodology looks at U.S. laws, presidential memorandums, and Article 98 agreements to show how the U.S. interpreted Article 98.2 to justify immunity for its citizens, while still influencing ICC member states despite not joining the court. Additionally, U.S. resolutions show how powerful states keep greater control through the veto power, while weaker states are more likely to face ICC referral. And lastly, international organizations reveal the practical tensions between ICC member obligations and US bilateral immunity agreements. In my findings, I hope to show that US laws like ASPA and aid-linked BIAs built long-term opposition to the ICC jurisdiction. After 9/11, anti-ICC policies were framed as national security measures, even though these efforts had already begun previously during the Bill Clinton administration. And across administrations, the US has consistently combined diplomacy and political pressure to limit ICC authority. Bill Clinton used aid certifications, George W. Bush enforced BIAs, Barack Obama used softer anti-C rhetoric, but Donald Trump has since imposed sanctions. And the US has also engaged with the ICC selective, treating allies differently from many global South states depending on its geopolitical interests. And in my analysis, I've shown that the US has reshaped Article 98.2 through political pressure and diplomacy rather than changing the law itself. A pattern I noticed was that many countries that signed BIAs were all in the global south. And laws like ASPA has used military aid and US influence in the United Security Council to pressure these countries into compliance. Soft power has justified US exceptionalism, while hard power has enforced it. The US argued its domestic courts were more reliable than the ICC, despite at the time controversies like Guantanamo Bay detention camps and the Iraq War were very debated. Which reveals double standards in accountability. And from a TWIL perspective, Article 98.2 has helped create a two-tiered system. US allies and NATO states have often received exemptions and continued aid, while many global South countries have faced stricter pressure and aid conditionality. The Nethercutt Amendment especially showed how US policy followed geopolitical interests rather than neutral legal principles. And so through this research, I argue that the US use of Article 98.2 shows how international law can reinforce global hierarchies rather than challenge them. And through aid pressure and legal exceptionalism, the US embedded coercion within the language of rule-based justice. I believe that reimagining international criminal law requires centering global South perspectives and confronting the colonial power structures shaping international institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jade. Okay, our next speaker is Saida.
Hi, let me just give me a second so I could share my screen. Where do I go from here? Can you guys see this?
Yeah, usually if you go to slideshow,
Okay. Okay. Got it.
and then play from start.
Okay. Okay. So my research is about hi, my name is Sayeda, and I'm a sociology major, and I have a minor in labor studies, and my research examines how SoFi Stadium accelerated displacement already underway in Inglewood to rising rents and speculative redevelopment and pressures on long-term residents and small businesses. So basically, what my question was, the main question guiding my research is how has the development of SoFi Stadium affected Inglewood's demographics and small businesses, and how have rising rents and land values contributed to displacement or adaptation? And my approach is a mixed method approach. I have qualitative and quantitative data, and also it's process oriented, which basically means that it's a causal pattern I'm going to show and not just like before and after effect. Okay. Okay, so um, to understand how we have to understand the history, why the redevelopment has such a strong impact. We have to first understand the structural condition actively present in Inglewood. In Inglewood experienced white flight, deindustrialization, and redlining, which weakened economic instability, stability, and reduced investment. And then we have the 2008 foreclosure crisis, which disproportionately hit Black and Latino neighborhoods. So by the time, like we can see the timeline here, when the SoFi Stadium was announced in 2016, the city already had major structural vulnerabilities. So it's not like it just SoFi came and all of that happened. So basically, it was like a 64% rental population, and it had no rent control, and it had no affordable housing projects at that time in place or in the pipeline either. So how I analyze this power structure is through the three analytic frameworks. One is predatory inclusion, which and growth machine theory and rent gap theory to how these stadium led developments unfold in historically divested cities like Inglewood, and what are the effects. So for the quantitative data, I gathered it through the census.gov website, and there are like three charts here: the median household income and the rent income, the rent, the gross rent, and the home values. So I was able to collect this data from 2010 to 2024, and where I saw that the rents were increased a lot, but the income did not increase as much. And when the home values increased, that's how what the rent gap theory shows, that when the home values increase, the rent prices of those property also increase. It becomes a market rate rent. That's what it's called. Another thing I found was the commercial displacement on the ground. I did my field visit to Market Street, and also I gathered on a 3 mile radius data for like 10 properties which were near SoFi Stadium, and how did the rent prices changed, and what were the actual value, and how they were frozen by Prop 13. So basically the interplay of Prop 13, how the land values are frozen, but they can still charge market rent. So basically it's hurting more the renters who are in our small businesses, we can say. And then the qualitative data, when I did on Market Street, I learned the subjective experience, in the sense that not everybody was it was not like everybody was unhappy or everyone was happy. And it was like how the politician put it, like it was a revitalization, or it was a genesis effect. It was not like that. So I learned like many perspectives through the local residents. So I thought that was really, really like really important for my research. Next, what I learned, how vacant buildings or vacancy functions as a mechanism of displacement. And I saw that myself when I went for the field visit, because how storefronts were gated and empty, and like homelessness increased, and how they were deliberately putting these businesses. Some of them were out of business, but then other business owners were not, who owned their shops, they were not putting it out for rent because they wanted to get like a higher price for it. So they were not renting it out. So they were deliberately putting it vacant for, for it results in displacements, we can say. Okay, and then another finding I had was how they were like cities' affordable housing projects, or like a whole decade of basically from 2009 to 2025. Like there's a whole timeline of how these affordable housing projects were either stalled or either like canceled, or either they were like they just vanished. Like for example, there was in 2009 there was a $40 million pledge for affordable housing, and when SoFi Stadium announced that there was the money, nobody knew where the money went, because Mayor Butts could not answer where that money is. So just like that, we saw a pattern of affordable housing projects either failing or stalling. And at the same time, we are seeing, in my research, I'm showing that market rate or high-end ceiling projects, or like rate homes are being built, and they're being sold, and they are like the stadium is being built, the Intuit Dome is being built. So we see that on one side there is infrastructure, or we see in the investments coming into life, but we don't see what's needed for the population of 64% people who are like renters. So in conclusion, let me go to the other side. Yeah, so in conclusion, I did find out that SoFi did not cause this displacement, but it did accelerate displacement in a city already vulnerable from decades of divestment, the absence of tenant protection, and the 2008 crisis. And for the solution, I would suggest, like, it's not a policy paper, but I would want like stricter measures for affordability housing requirements, and also proper meaningful rent stabilization, like before these redevelopment projects are come into place. And political will that prioritize residents. That's my message. And I would like to thank you, URC-HASS, for funding my research, and Professor Brand, who for her guidance and feedback, and everyone at Inglewood who talked to me and they were not shy of sharing what they felt. And yeah, the sociology department for fostering purposeful research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saida. Okay, last but not least, we're gonna hear from Tamana. So Tamana, you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Sure thing. Perfect. Hi, everyone. It feels like such a privilege to be at the tail end of such an amazing lineup of presenters. My name is Tamana. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a psychology major and global studies minor. Today, I'll be talking about some research that I've been working on for the past 3 years that kind of sits in the intersection of linguistics and social psychology. Before I get into the specifics of the work I've done, I would like you guys to sit back and imagine a scenario. Now, I like to use this example a lot for all of my presentations, so bear with me if this gets a little repetitive. But imagine you work in a lab, and you have a coworker named Sam. Now, you don't know much about Sam except for the fact that he's usually on time for lab meetings. Now, imagine I come into the lab the next day and ask you, so what do you think of Sam? What kind of a person is he? Here, you would have a plethora of ways of describing Sam, but one of the ways that you could describe him is that he is responsible. Now, this would be accurate given that responsible means dependable, being hardworking, being conscientious, and being on time. Or you could describe him to be punctual. Now, this would also be accurate, but just way more specific. And this difference between words like responsible and punctual is what my research focuses on. I look at trait breadth, or how broad versus specific a trait or adjective is, and what kind of implications we have in making judgments about the people around us, depending on how broad or narrow of adjectives we use. So firstly, a little bit about what I was doing in this project. We ran two studies. In both of these studies, we gave participants 40 adjectives or traits across 10 thematic domains. Our domains included themes like sociability, cooperation, leadership, intelligence, so on and so forth. And for each trait that the participants saw, they were asked two questions. Do you think this trait is going to be consistent over time? And do you think this trait is going to be consistent over situations? Now, our first research question kind of wanted to see if trait breadth in general influenced any perceived stability. Our second question here was to see whether valence, or whether a trait is positive or negative, moderated this sort of effect. And our predictions initially were very straightforward. We thought that broad traits would be more stable. People, when they saw broad traits versus narrow traits, would think that, hey, this description is more stable across times and different situations. Here, we also saw that we also predicted that broad positive traits would be the most stable. But surprisingly, we found the opposite. In our very first study, we found that instead of a general main effect of breadth, there was a breadth by valence interaction. More specifically, trait breadth only mattered for negative traits. Here we saw that narrow negative traits were actually described to be more stable across times and situations than broad negative traits. So what that means as an example is when someone saw the description for a target subject calling that subject as stingy, they thought that description was more consistent across times and situations rather than that target subject being described in more broad ways like selfish. And so this was a pattern that we saw across both temporal and cross-situational judgments, but we also saw the same pattern across all 10 domains that we were testing for. We also ran a replication study. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but surprisingly, we found the same result as our first study. So what are our takeaways here? Our first and most important takeaway is that negative traits are actually more context sensitive than we first predicted. We see that trait breadth only matters when we are talking about more negative or socially indesirable traits. And here we see that even though as people we think that good traits are going to generalize across different breadths, negative traits actually require more specificity. So we need more narrow and concrete words when we use adjectives that are negative versus more broad. Again, this becomes important because we use adjectives so frequently. Adjectives are such powerful words that find such a critical part of our language use every day. It kind of determines how we judge people, social groups, and cultures at large, and kind of understanding how these adjectives can influence the judgments we make about people around us can really also help us be more critical in ways that we use this language. But here I would like to thank Dr. Stressner, who was my mentor on this project. I would also like to thank the Keck Humanistic Inquiry Research Award Program that I was a part of over this last year. I would also like to thank my parents, family, and friends that are also in this meeting. But yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Shamana. And thank you all for those really wonderful presentations. I feel like we got a really good overview of like all the different types of research that are happening at UCLA. So I'm going to start off with a question for all of you, which is about our panel theme, right? Research powers progress. So my question is, how does your research engage with the theme? How are you thinking about progress? How are you thinking about power? How are you challenging these things? How is your research supporting these things? So who wants to go ahead and answer that question first?
I think I can start off.
Wonderful, thank you.
I think my project kind of is trying to answer or provide evidence for a saying that we've heard quite often, that words have power.
I think it's very important to realize how language can be used as a sort of tool that not only perpetuates but also reveals the sort of power dynamics we see in society. And I think addressing those sort of inequalities we see in language use is the first step in kind of challenging our traditional or stereotypical language use. Here, I think it's also important to understand that we do have very robust preliminary findings that support this idea that something as small of a stimulus as one single word or one single adjective is creating differential impact in the way we judge people. So I think just off of that, I think it's important research or important work that we've been doing to kind of tangle out or tease out how language can be used in stereotype and bias formation as well. I think academically, this project has also been super interesting for me because it addresses a wide gap in literature. Right now, if we kind of look at linguistics and social psychology literature, people talk about the impact of broad and abstract language versus narrow language when we are making impressions about other people, but no one really talks about whether that effect is also seen within adjectives. It's such an intuitive concept that we can understand that there are some adjectives that are more broad than others, but no one has really worked on that. And I think being a part of that project, being a part of this project has been very fulfilling for me and kind of answering the question of how we can envision progress going forward.
Thank you so much. Who wants to answer that question next?
I think I
I
can go
think,
next.
Oh, let's do Syed and then Jay.
Okay. Yeah, so to think about power, I feel like when I took the urban sociology and research classes at UCLA, I was able to connect the larger structural inequalities to real experiences happening in communities like in Inglewood, and also including myself, the experience I had with soft eviction and housing instability. So I feel like UCLA gave me those tools to turn something I lived through into a research project that could examine these issues on a large structural level and hopefully spread awareness about displacements, how displacements unfold in cities. And one thing, like it's not a policy paper, but one thing I would want to spread awareness about is that like better or stronger tenant protections and affordable housing projects in way before these redevelopments start. Yeah.
Thank you. Jay, do you want to go next?
yeah, I think for me, I look at progress as a way to make systems more equitable, accountable, and inclusive of perspectives that have historically been marginalized. My research looks at how international legal institutions reflect unequal global power relationships, and sometimes policy is framed as lawful diplomacy, but in reality, they reinforce deeper structural hierarchies and allowed powerful states to avoid accountability. And I think my project aims to look at who shapes international law, who is protected from it, and how this becomes constrained through political and economic leverage. And I think it's relevant today. My project focuses on the time period of the early 2000s when there was a lot of anti-ICC narratives and isolationist rhetoric. But I think this is still seen today, and I hope my research advances knowledge across international law and US domestic politics through connecting historical colonial legacies and then connecting it to today's legal and diplomatic practices.
Thank you. Amaya, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I think my project really focuses on the power aspect of things because environmental exposures are not experienced equally, especially in different communities. My project specifically focuses on the community of South Los Angeles. So we actually do a lot of community work that I'm not really a part of, but we go out and speak to and interview community members and really narrow down on their personal experiences. And a lot of these also come with economic barriers as well. For example, not being able to run the AC long enough, even though this area, South Los Angeles, is being more exposed to like more heat and noise stress as well from construction, high crime rates causing this low helicopters, for example. It's just a lot of noise exposures, heat exposures that they really can't control. And this is where they live, and sometimes it's really hard to move out as well because of, how pricey houses can be. It's really nothing that they can do and nothing that they are in control of, which is can be really disappointing. And with this science, through scientific evidence, I think our main goal is to really support stronger environmental regulations and policy changes, such as, for example, incarcerated people don't really have these regulations when they're working outside, and it can be 100 plus degrees out there that can be possibly affecting their neurodevelopmental health in the long run. So I think that's a really huge power component of my research and really connecting with the community.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, on my end, I put you two together on this panel because I think your work actually speaks to each other in some interesting ways. Okay, my next question is more about your research experiences. So I'd love to know what kind of new or surprising things you have learned by doing your research. So you could answer that. That could be new and surprising things that you found in your academic work, or maybe some new and surprising things you found about yourself. So who wants to start with answering that question?
I can go ahead. Something
Yeah, go
new
ahead.
and surprising that I think I didn't know was in me was like the for like going to field visit and actually interviewing people and talking to people. Like they were like these big huge African American guys, and I was able to talk to them, and they were so nice to me. And so I think that, and also the subjective experience of what each person was saying. Like one person is saying, oh, the promises were not made and not fulfilled. They were made but not fulfilled, for example, for local hiring and stuff. And one person was so enthusiastic. He was like saying that, oh, it's good stuff is happening, and we are like waiting for good things. So I think that was the main, because I was reading a lot and I was going to uh, all these articles and things like that. But I think all that, it was more um, meaningful once I interviewed people because I could put two and two together. So I also saw the power of qualitative and quantitative work. So I think that was really different.
Thank you.
I can go next. I found it really interesting when I was researching the US's opposition to the International Criminal Court and where it began. The legislation that sort of pushed the whole anti-ICC sentiment actually began during the Clinton administration. But it was kind of forgotten, and then it got a big push from Bush, like post 9/11. And it instead of it was it's kind of been framed as conservative, but it's actually more like bipartisan than many people realized. And I thought it was really interesting to uncover the political calculations behind this. It was framed as national security measures within the broader war on terror. Um, and they kind of like took advantage of the political climate at the time to pass legislation that had previously already been pushed. And another thing was how during Bush's reelection, he once again used like his anti-ICC um, campaign to help him in his reelection. So I thought it was really interesting, like the big role that US domestic politics played in shaping an anti-C position and how they kind of force many global South states to also take their side just because of the way their domestic politics work. And it's kind of unfair in the international system how much power the US has. And then I was also surprised to learn how early ICC frameworks, they still shape US policy today. And the US has been consistently skeptical towards the court. And I think that it's really interesting to see how it's been all the different presidents have framed it in different ways, but the legislation has stayed the same.
Thank you. Amaya, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take this question in a more like broader sense. I think something that surprised me was how different research can was actually from a classroom setting. As a first generation student, I didn't really know what research was, and I think going into it and having the privilege to actually lead my own project in the Tornini lab, it really taught me that research comes with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pivoting as well. And so I had a lot of failures of experiments and being able to just pivot and be like, okay, like I have to now just rework my entire schedule for the entire week, but that's okay because at the end of the day, it led me to an even more questions being asked. And really just made my research go deeper into the question and made me think about things that I didn't really think about from the start, which just made my whole project more complex and more compelling. Just starting working with mutant lines, like adding another layer of complexity and really connecting it back to the community, relating it to neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism, ADHD, and really just bridging this gap between society and science is really important to me. And I just didn't really have that perspective coming into research, and especially with my major, human biology and society, like it just also gave me another perspective on top of this whole thing. And that was very surprising to me. And it's also just super important that we get to have these conversations about this and really, it just really emphasizes the importance of research. And I think that was also surprising to me, but I'm also still learning every single day in the lab, which was also surprising. I'm just used to having a book and being able to learn it once and write it on a piece of paper or test, right? But yeah, this really just made me think more critically and continue to be able to get used to learning on a day-to-day basis. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's an experience that maybe that a lot of us have had while doing research, is trying, failing, and trying again, right?
Yeah, just jumping off of that, I feel like I definitely resonated with a lot of what Amaya said. I think there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to research. I think for me, more surprisingly, was I found a result that was quite countered or like quite opposite to what I'd initially predicted. I think kind of reworking it, but also taking that sort of disappointment in a positive light where I got a chance to learn more about the literature, kind of reevaluate the perspective I was taking on my broader research project. I think that was super grounding, and I think it just led to um, a more meaningful project in general. I think I was able to look at other fields of literature within linguistics and social psychology that exist to kind of explain this difference that I found from what I'd originally anticipated. I think more broadly, also, I realized over this process that research is more creative than we give it credit for. I think usually research is seen to be this cold cut, very hard truth, objective practice, which it is, but I think it's also definitely very creative. I think you have to get very creative when it comes to problem solving, when you have to think of ways of controlling for your variables, interpreting your results, and even like the smallest of changes can really alter the way we see our findings or like the way we interpret our findings. And I think that was a realization that came to me with much joy and pleasure.
Thank you so much. So we've got a few minutes in case we've got questions from the audience. Does anyone, I think I saw a hand up a little bit earlier, but did anyone have any questions for our panelists that I haven't gotten to yet? I'll just say we have a comment from my colleague John in our audience that it would be fascinating to show Tamana's adjective research into Jade's research and to how the ICC was promoted or negated. Yeah, that's interesting, right?
I was
You,
gonna actually, oh, sorry to cut you off,
no, I
but
was just going to say future research project. Yeah, go ahead, Tamana.
I'm actually also on the pre-law track, and I think a big part of why I started working on this project was kind of to see how criminal perception can be affected by the sort of simple language that we use in court. And I think it would be very fascinating to kind of see how that also pans out on a more international scale, especially with the ICC. I think that'd be very, very cool to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I also wanted to add like a specific section of my project actually does focus on like the administration's use of ICC, but it could definitely go way in more depth. There's just so much stuff out there to be analyzed.
Mhm. Thanks to you both. Do any of you have plans for after graduation that you want to share?
Yeah, I can go ahead. But essentially, we're in the works of piping out two more studies on the same project. We are going to be looking at this sort of vertical versus horizontal inference model that we see. So I guess we're doing very novel work when it comes to creating a model of how we infer information from adjectives or traits. And our to give you guys a little sneak peek is that we're kind of anticipating a difference in inferences made on a horizontal level and on a vertical level. Vertically, we see that some traits might have more power when it comes to inferring information about a person's behavior across times and situations. And on the horizontal level, we're kind of seeing that traits might have this differential impact in how we perceive it to relate to other traits of the same nature. But yeah, hopefully we're going to be working on a publication for this very soon, and that's one of my post-grad plans.
Yeah. Exciting. Yeah, and I should say, it doesn't, I know not all of you are necessarily graduating, but future plans for future research. We'd love to hear it.
I think I can take a stab at this question. I think now that we have like very solid like behavioral phenotypes that we see in our behavior runs, I think we want to go ahead and look at the brain level. I've been doing brain dissections, practicing live brain dissections now, to actually really just focus on what circuits specifically are causing this change in behavioral phenotype, and also looking at RNA sequencing as well. Just really narrowing down what is causing these phenotypes as well, and also working on publications as well, really solidifying my figures on Adobe Illustrator a lot of the times. And I think that's where our direction of our research is going.
Thanks.
I think I'll just probably look into getting my research published somewhere, but I'm not at that step yet. So probably this summer or in the fall.
And Saida, what about you?
Yeah, I was gonna add that I do want to research more into this, how all this development of the stadiums and everything it plays out when like near the Olympics, and also the transit that's being the metro line that's being made, the metro lane. So yeah, I do want to take it forward. And I would just wanted to add about the linearity of research, like how one of my peers said that it's not linear. That's true for me as well, because when I started, I was like, okay, I have this much, because I had research on what the residents were feeling, but then my professor kind of steered me towards what the businesses felt. So it kind of just kept on giving me more and more questions, and yeah, it just got deeper and stuff. So yeah, I was able to find out a lot, and I can even find out more, well, if I continue this.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, let's do a big round of applause, virtual applause for our panelists today. I just want to say it was really, really fun moderating these panels, getting to learn about your research, all of you from across across North and South Campus. Student panelists, I would love it if you would all just stay on the Zoom for 1 second so we can take a group photo. But everyone else is welcome to leave. Thank you so much for joining us in our first official undergraduate research week event. We hope to see you at events throughout the week. And yeah, I'm really proud of our wonderful students. So great job, everyone. Congratulations. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the next event.